This Sunday we have two wonderful readings. We hear of God's glory and the effect of being in his presence. Moses and Jesus are both transformed in their appearance, and this change inspires fear in those around them. In our reading from the book of Exodus, we hear about Moses being transformed in the presence of God. Moses spends time alone with God. This time transforms him. His appearance changes. The time Moses has alone with God is an essential part of his growing relationship with God. In a previous chapter of Exodus, chapter 33, verse 11, we read, "The Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend." This is something we can learn from. We can speak about God and say we believe, but unless we spend time in prayer with him, unless we speak with him, unless we sit quietly in his presence, we won't come to know him. Spending time with God changes. Thus, listening to him can change how we feel about things and cope with things. I'd like to share an experience I had when I was about 15. Life was very difficult for many reasons, and I felt quite desperate not knowing how things could ever change. I remember sitting and praying one day. As I prayed, I felt an arm around my shoulders. I don't know if it transformed my appearance at that moment, but I knew that God was there with me. He was reassuring me of his presence. Circumstances didn't get any better for a few years, but I knew that God was with me throughout it. That sense of his comforting and reassuring presence has never left me, and I know it's something I never will forget. I think this encounter was perhaps my personal spiritual transfiguration. I know it changed me completely. In our Gospel reading today, we hear of the transfiguration of Jesus. The verses we read come after Peter's acknowledgement of who Jesus is, and Jesus speaking to his disciples of his suffering and death that will come shortly. We frequently read in the Gospels about Jesus praying, and in our reading today, we hear once more that he goes up a mountain to pray. He takes Peter, James, and John with him. These were the three who were with him when he raised Jairus' daughter. Peter has recently recognized Jesus as the Messiah. And these three will also be with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. As Jesus prays, his appearance changes, his face changes, and his garments become dazzling white. He's transformed as he spends time with God the Father. This scene is similar to that of Moses encountering God. Next, we hear of the appearance of Moses and Elijah beside Jesus, linking what's happening now to the Old Testament law and prophecy. Here we have Moses, who was given the law by God, and we have the great prophet Elijah, who spoke of a Messiah to come and save God's people. The presence of Moses and Elijah shows the importance of Jesus. It's a sign of exactly who he is. We hear that they appear in glory. I wonder what their appearance was like. Perhaps their faces were shining as they stood with Jesus. They speak of the forthcoming departure of Jesus and give a clear indication of who Jesus really is. This sight must have been amazing for the three disciples. They were tired and very sleepy, but had managed to keep themselves awake as Jesus began to pray. Now they have this fantastic sight in front of them. Not only do they see God's glory in Jesus, but they see the great figures of Moses and Elijah. I wonder how we would react in this situation. Would we be stunned into silence? Perhaps we'd be confused. Perhaps we'd react like Peter, wanting to know what we should do. In both our readings, we hear of the fear and terror of the onlookers. In our Old Testament reading, the people are filled with fear when they see Moses' shining face. In our Gospel reading, the disciples are terrified as the cloud embraces them. I think we can understand this fear in both our readings. Both are extraordinary encounters beyond the understanding of those witnessing them. The event in our Gospel is known as the Transfiguration of Jesus. But I think perhaps there was also a transformation for Peter, James, and John. When they're in the cloud, they hear God speak. They hear that Jesus is his Son and are commanded to listen to him. Surely this must have helped them to see who Jesus really was. We hear that the disciples kept silent about this experience on the mountain. Perhaps the experience was so powerful that they couldn't put it into words. Or perhaps they felt that no one would believe them. I wonder if hearing the voice of God sustained them in difficult times, just as my encounter sustains me. Transfiguration means a complete change of form or appearance into a more beautiful or spiritual state. I wonder if you've seen anyone whose appearance changes when they speak of Jesus. I know I've encountered people who seem to come fully alive as they speak of Jesus. Do you see a beauty in the faces of people praying that was not there before? Do you come across someone who seems transformed when they're praying? Perhaps you feel a sense of change in yourself when spending time with the Lord in prayer. Jesus changes us when we turn to him and acknowledge who he is. Next Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, the beginning of our journey through Lent. I know many people choose to give up something during Lent, but what about doing something extra? Perhaps it's time to reflect on how much time we spend alone with God. Perhaps it's time to reflect on God's glory and consider how we can show that glory in the way we live our lives. How can we show God's steadfast love and faithfulness to people we spend time with each day, to our family members and friends? Time spent in God's loving presence can sustain us when people mock us for our belief in God, or when we face trouble and difficulty in life. We don't have a mountain here in Stretford to go up to spend time alone with God, but I encourage you to find a place and time to spend with him, talking to him, listening to him, giving thanks, sharing your joys and your sorrows with him. The world seems very fragile at the moment with the situation in Ukraine. It would be easy to spend our time worrying constantly about what the future will bring. My prayer today is that each one of us will be reassured by the abiding love of God in our lives. And may we each present a shining face to others, showing the glory of God. Amen.